So welcome everyone. I think we are ready to start now. Dear colleagues, I welcome you to the side event organized by the IPU, UN Women, and the permanent missions to the United Nations of Canada, Mexico, Uganda, and Trinidad and Tobago. This side event is on the occasion of the 66th Commission on the Status of Women, is entitled One Decade on How Gender Sensitive Are Our Parliaments Now. For those of you who were not with us yesterday, my name is Hala Ramzi Faiz. I'm a member of the Shura Council of the Kingdom of Bahrain and first Vice President of the IPU Bureau of Women Parliamentarians. And I will be your moderator for today. To begin with, I'd like to say some few words as my opening remarks. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests and partners, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be opening today's side event on the occasion of the 66th Commission of the Status of Women. I thank you all for joining today, and I take this opportunity to thank our partners, UN Women, and the permanent missions of Canada, Mexico, and Uganda to the United Nations for co-sponsoring this event. We are pleased to be partnering with you all as we work towards our joint goals of advancing gender equality, upholding women's rights, and prioritizing women's empowerment in all fields. Today, we are recognizing a special achievement. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments, which was unanimously adopted by the IPU Assembly in 2012. Gender-sensitive parliaments are parliaments that respond to the needs and interests of both men and women in their composition, structures, operations, methods, and work. They are institutions that remove barriers to women's full participation and offer a positive example to society of equality between men and women. Since its adoption, the IPU has proudly led a comprehensive and multi-stakeholder effort to promote gender-sensitive parliaments. This has created transformative change within institutions around the world and strengthened their capacity to promote gender equality. Other agencies and organizations, many of which are with us here today, have taken up the concept and the objective behind it and provided support to parliaments towards becoming more gender sensitive. Today's discussions provide an opportunity to take stock of progress made over the past 10 years. As we commemorate a decade of advocating for gender-sensitive parliaments, we must chart our progress together and collectively identify where we should go from here. This side event gives us an opportunity to assess how gender-sensitive and inclusive our parliaments have become, and to share experiences, good practices, and innovations to inform future directions. Today, we will be looking at 4 key elements of gender-sensitive parliaments, each one as crucial as the next. The first is women's access to parliamentary leadership positions, specifically looking at the establishment and implementation of internal measures. During this session, we will be hearing from the experiences of parliaments that have adopted and implemented internal gender quotas for leadership positions. Our recently launched report on women in parliament looked at chairpersons of 5 types of parliamentary committees across countries and found that women comprise only 27 of chairs of parliamentary committees globally. As model institutions of gender equality, more needs to be done to support women's leadership within parliaments. The second element is adopting and implementing gender provisions in parliamentary policies, including anti-harassment policies. IPU studies on sexism, harassment, and violence against women in parliament found that 8 out of 10 women MPs surveyed experienced some form of psychological violence during their mandate. Sexual, physical, and economic violence against women are also rampant and taking place on the premises of parliament. Our institutions have more work to do before they can become safe spaces for women. Through establishing rules and mechanisms on anti-harassment, we will be hearing from MPs today that have embarked on such policies in Parliament. The third is establishing childcare and family-friendly infrastructures in Parliament. One of the ultimate hurdles to gender equality in Parliament is the extent to which both men and women MPs are able to balance work and personal life and family obligations. Today, we will hear from parliamentarians who have successfully established helpful infrastructures within their institutions. Last but not least, the fourth element is working in partnership with men to advance gender equality. Gender equality is to the benefit of everyone. Thus, men must be involved in gender equality efforts to achieve sustainable results. This afternoon, we will be listening to male and female MPs on their experiences in partnering towards gender equality efforts in parliaments. Dear colleagues, our parliaments are constantly evolving to mirror our societies. As parliamentarians, we have the power to make our institutions more gender sensitive and gender responsive, and in turn, reflect the gender equality we wish to see in our countries and globally. We know that we are better when we are learning from each other, helping each other, and pushing each other to become better than before. Hopefully, through our deliberations today, we can chart a way forward in the second decade to come for gender-sensitive parliaments. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. I now invite Ms. Zeina Hilal, the Manager of Gender Partnership Program and Youth Participation Program of the IPU, to make her introductory remarks on gender-sensitive parliaments.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are in Europe. Good morning and good evening for the others. A very quick overview of the context in which we are meeting today on gender-sensitive parliaments, which we see as a transformative framework for parliamentary institutions. Next, please. Let me tell you the story. So at the beginning, at the 127th Assembly of the IPU that was held in October 2012 in Quebec, and I look at Senator McFedran here, parliaments adopted unanimously a plan of action for gender-sensitive parliaments. This means that parliamentary institutions themselves as an important step to adopt a plan for all parliaments of the world to become more gender-sensitive institutions. The plan was drawn up following consultations with IPU member parliaments. It builds on parliamentary good practices, and I think this is really important. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from parliaments themselves, actually, what they were working on, what they were succeeding in advancing. It proposes also concrete solutions for the advancements of gender-sensitive parliaments in all countries. What I mean by this is that it takes into account the fact that all parliaments are not the same. All parliaments do not have the same resources, the same capacities, the same maybe political will as well at certain stages. So it is a plan that tries to take into consideration differences among countries. It also offered a definition, and Madam Chairperson, you already gave part of it. Next, please. A gender-sensitive parliament is premised on the principle of gender equality. That's what we're talking about. When we say gender-sensitive, we mean that it is premised on the principle of gender equality, which is that both men and women have an equal right to participate in its structures, in its processes, without discrimination and without recrimination. I just came out of another meeting where young women parliamentarians were explaining how every time they took the floor in parliament, they were being targeted, silenced, and prevented from doing their job. So again, a gender-sensitive parliament would make sure that men and women have equal right to participate in its work without discrimination and without recrimination. It is a parliament that responds to the needs and interests of both men and women of society and men and women parliamentarians in the structures, the operations, the methods, and the work of the institution. While research has shown us that women in parliament have been the main promoters of the gender equality agenda, we thought back in 2012 and until now, we still think that this objective must be understood not as the responsibility of women only, but as the responsibility of the institution of parliament as a whole and of men and women alike. Next, please. So what makes a gender-sensitive parliament? A parliament that is in its composition made of equal numbers of men and women, but that also has men and women in positions of leadership. It is a parliament where laws to support gender equality exist and are passed, where gender equality objectives and a plan of action exist, where gender-sensitive working policies are put in place and implemented. It is a parliament that mainstreams gender equality in all its work, its modalities, and its structures. It's also a parliament that has a non-sexist environment, free from gender-based violence, including facilities suited to men and women members and staff. It's also a parliament where men shoulder their gender equality responsibilities and where there is a proactive and gender-sensitive action by political parties. Next. So the IPU Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments puts 7 action areas for parliaments to advance. The first one is to increase the number of women parliamentarians and to increase the number of women parliamentarians in leadership positions in parliament. The objective is to achieve equality in participation. The plan also calls on parliaments to strengthen gender equality legislation and policy internally, and legislation and policy in general for society. It calls on parliaments to mainstream gender equality throughout all parliamentary work, in the way committees function, in the way the secretariat provide assistance, etc. It calls also parliament to institute or to improve gender-sensitive infrastructures and to make sure that the parliamentary culture is also gender-sensitive. It calls parliaments to ensure that the responsibility for gender equality is shared by all parliamentarians, not only women, but men and women alike. It encourages political parties to be champions of gender equality, so that it starts with political parties and continues in parliament, and so that parliaments and political parties work in the same direction for gender equality. It also calls on Parliament to enhance the gender sensitivity and gender equality among parliamentary staff. So these are the 7 action areas called for in the IPU Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments. Next. So where are we after 10 years of existence of this plan of action? So as you saw through my presentation, policy orientation and also support were provided to enhance gender sensitivity and gender responsiveness in parliaments. The call for gender self-assessments and audits was very strong so that parliaments could take stock of the situation, agree on reforms to be carried out, and implement such reforms accordingly. The IPU not only called parliaments to carry out self-assessments and audits, but it offered also a self-assessment toolkit for parliaments to use. And we have also been able to support a series of gender assessments and audits in different countries from different regions between 2013 and today. We also supported implementation of reforms in some of the supported parliaments, and I know many of the participants here today have been part of these assessments supported in parliaments. The expertise in gender-sensitive parliaments was shared with many global, regional, and national institutions, and it inspired the development of tools, but also auditing methods and actions by different organizations to support parliaments to be more gender sensitive institutions. And I think this is a great achievement over the past 10 years. Now we're at the juncture of starting a new era in gender-sensitive parliaments, and thank you very much for joining us today to start this effort looking ahead. So we are starting by taking stock of the situation. We are trying to find out what happened in Parliament over the past 10 years after the adoption of the Plan of Action. Today's event is one step in that direction. There will also be other consultations to come. We would also like to collect an up-to-date set of information on innovative practices developed by parliaments. The idea here is to be able to craft a new path by bringing together parliaments, but also organizations, agencies, practitioners, researchers, and academics that have been supporting the advancement of gender-sensitive parliaments over the past 10 years. The objective being, of course, to share lessons learned. We are many in this field, and to brainstorm together on the way forward. Of course, this will nurture the building up of findings and recommendations towards opening a new chapter for further improving the gender sensitivity and responsiveness of parliaments by providing, maybe we will see, a new set of recommended actions. So thank you so much for being with us today. It's the first step in a journey that is starting now. Again, thank you very much for joining this journey today, and we very much hope that you will stay involved and engaged with us as we move forward with these different steps this year. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Zeina. And now we will proceed with the welcoming remarks from our co-sponsors. To start with, I call on Ms. Mary Lou McFadden, Senator from Canada, for your remarks, please.
Merci, Madame Chair. Chers collègues, en tant que sénatrice du Manitoba, je reconnais que je vis sur le territoire de Traité 1, le territoire traditionnel des Anishinaabe, des Cris, des Ojibwe, des Dakota et des Nez, et la patrie de la nation métisse. And I acknowledge that the Parliament of Canada is situated on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations. On behalf of Canada, I want to welcome you all to this important event on gender-sensitive parliaments at the 66th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. I'm an independent senator, which means I have no particular affiliation with a political party. As a human rights lawyer, I've been a women's rights advocate for my professional life. And today, as we wait for President Zelensky of Ukraine to address Canada's Parliament, my thoughts are with our parliamentary colleagues in Ukraine who have had to put down their pens and pick up arms to defend their democracy. Thank you, Zaina, for noting that 10 years ago, the IPU adopted its plan of action in Quebec City in Canada. However, women and gender diverse people are still severely underrepresented in parliaments, and they continue to face many barriers and challenges. Several factors may explain why this is so. One, political and electoral systems have an impact on the number of women elected. Proportional systems are more likely to elect a higher number of women. Two, systemic discrimination, including stereotypes about gender roles, have a negative impact on the way women are seen and portrayed in politics. Moreover, three, women continue to face socioeconomic challenges in financing electoral campaigns and gender-based violence even when they are elected. The absence or limited ability of family-friendly and gender-sensitive facilities are the fourth point. These workplaces in parliamentary settings may deter women from getting involved in politics, or when they get there, make their participation more difficult. But colleagues, we can learn from our progress. In 1995, only 11.3% of the world's parliamentarians were women. At the time of the Plan of Action adoption in 2012, that number had risen to just over 20%. And as of last month, the IPU has reported that the global average of women in parliament stood at 26.1%. In Canada, the journey towards gender parity began just over a century ago when Agnes MacPhail became the first Canadian woman to be elected to the House of Commons in December 1921. Today, women members of parliament account for 34.5% of federal parliaments. The Senate of Canada, where I work, has reached gender parity in 2020. A few years ago, Canada's Standing Committee on the Status of Women presented a comprehensive report for improving the representation of women in politics. In its report, the committee noted that increasing women's representation in electoral politics is essential to lead to greater gender equality, better social, economic, and political outcomes for all Canadians. Colleagues, let's remember this. We're here today talking about gender-sensitive parliaments, not just because it's something that interests us. We're here today talking about gender-sensitive parliaments because it makes a positive difference to our societies and to our economies and to our democracies. In closing, I want to emphasize another point made in the report, and that is the importance of data collection. We need accurate, detailed, intersectional data to overcome barriers to the representation of women in politics. And I commend the IPU for starting our next decade with a focus on exactly this approach. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you. Next, I invite Ms. Jimena Escobedo Juarez, the Director General of Political Coordination at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, to take the floor for her opening message.
Buenos días a todas, buenas tardes a los que están en Europa. Es un gusto saludarles a todas y a todos y compartir con ustedes este relevante evento en el marco del 66 periodo de sesiones de la CSW. Quiero comenzar por resaltar la importancia del título de este evento y el valor de las políticas sensibles al género en nuestros parlamentos. Aunque más que sensibles al género, opino que nuestros parlamentos, y hablando específicamente del caso mexicano, se han vuelto cada día más responsivos a las demandas que emanan del mismo. Los parlamentos responsivos al género, en esencia, reconocen las necesidades e intereses de hombres y mujeres en su composición, estructuras, operaciones, métodos y trabajo. Son instituciones que eliminan barreras a la plena participación de las mujeres y que ofrecen ejemplos positivos a la sociedad al avanzar hacia la igualdad política entre hombres y mujeres. En su evolución constante y atendiendo las demandas de la ciudadanía, parlamentos como el mexicano sientan las bases y emprenden reformas sensibles al género para abogar por cambios en la cultura y las normas institucionales, fortaleciendo la capacidad y la influencia de las mujeres, en este caso específico a través de redes parlamentarias. Desde la Cancillería mexicana y en especial desde nuestro trabajo colaborativo y de vinculación con el Poder Legislativo, hemos avanzado e impulsado instrumentos legislativos en favor de las mujeres y niñas mexicanas, comenzando por el involucramiento activo de nuestras y nuestros legisladores en foros de alto nivel que abordan temas coyunturales que van desde el cambio climático hasta estrategias integrales de la recuperación de la pandemia, tomando en cuenta que las mujeres se han visto gravemente afectadas por la misma, desde el entorno laboral hasta en esferas que abarcan la vida personal, primordialmente lo que involucra el trabajo desproporcionado de cuidados. Y aprovecho aquí para saludar a las senadoras del Parlamento mexicano que nos acompañan el día de hoy. Al fungir como un vínculo también con el Poder Legislativo, la Cancillería ha venido impulsando también la Ley del Servicio Exterior Mexicano con una perspectiva que nace de una política exterior feminista que enaltece el rol de las mujeres y de la población LGBTQ+, en este servicio civil de carrera, abogando por sus derechos y reconociendo el arduo trabajo y las barreras históricas a las que se han enfrentado principalmente las funcionarias mexicanas, y que también tenemos hoy a la senadora Malú Michel, que ha sido quien ha impulsado esta reforma. Por otro lado, recientemente fue también votado y aprobado el convenio 190 sobre violencia y acoso de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, la OIT, mismo que se ratificará esta semana y que reconoce la violencia y el acoso en el mundo del trabajo, protegiendo a las y los trabajadores al considerar que el acoso se puede dar o no solo dentro de un entorno laboral. Este convenio también busca garantizar un fácil acceso a las vías de recurso y reparación, representando una herramienta de justicia en búsqueda de una igualdad sustantiva, principalmente para las mujeres trabajadoras. Estos breves ejemplos anteriores demuestran la trayectoria y acompañamiento que hemos mantenido con nuestro Poder Legislativo en materia de equidad de género para alcanzar poco a poco una igualdad de oportunidades. Por su parte, también reconozco y celebro que el Poder Legislativo ha evolucionado significativamente en la incorporación de políticas responsivas al género desde la adopción del Plan de Acción de GCP en 2012. El Poder Legislativo, en colaboración con la Cancillería y otras dependencias del Ejecutivo Federal, hemos trazado el inicio de un cambio transformador con perspectivas de género dentro de las instituciones mexicanas. El camino por recorrer aún es sumamente largo y el fortalecimiento de nuestro marco jurídico en favor de las mujeres continúa en ardua construcción, pero vamos avanzando. Y esto es con un acompañamiento de todas las fuerzas políticas, lo cual es todavía sumamente más importante. Tenemos una enorme responsabilidad en lograr la igualdad sustantiva y esta es imposible sin un marco jurídico progresista. Así que agradezco el espacio, reconozco todos los esfuerzos y lo que ha recorrido el Parlamento mexicano y todo lo que han hecho y hacen ahorita por el involucramiento de nuestras y nuestros parlamentarios en pro de nuestras mujeres y de nuestras niñas. Muchas gracias.
Next, and on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, I invite Ms. Ayanna Webster-Roy, Minister in the Office of Prime Minister on Gender and Child Affairs, to deliver her opening remarks.
Excellencies, colleagues, good day. I'm delighted to welcome each of you to this important session. A decade has elapsed since the unanimous adoption of the Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments. Therefore, the discourse of this gathering will focus on advancements in shifting the status quo as it relates to gender-sensitive parliaments in our respective states. Fundamentally, gender-sensitive legislators should reflect the needs and interests of women and men in their composition, structures, operations, methods, and work. Moreover, by the removal of barriers to the full participation of women serves as a positive example for society. If the proceeding serves as a guideline, I can confidently say that Trinidad and Tobago has made significant progress. I may be biased in my opinion because I have used the childcare service provided to the parliamentarians in the past, but my assertions is based more than that. While Trinidad and Tobago doesn't have formal gender quotas for elections, over the last decade, our Parliament and the Tobago House of Assembly have evolved into spaces where women have gradually assumed increasing leadership roles. The Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago comprises 73 members. In the House of Representatives, there are 12 elected women and 13 in the Senate. It is worth noting that both houses of Parliament have female presiding officers, as well as the fact that the current leader of the opposition and the leader of the House are both women. A similar situation exists in the Tobago House of Assembly, which currently has 20 members, including the presiding officer, who is a woman. 7 additional women serve in the Assembly, 4 were elected to represent various electoral districts, and 3 appointed as councillors. The formation of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity illustrates the vigorous pursuit of gender-related issues by the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Additionally, gender-sensitive actions are being promoted through workshops for parliamentary members and staff in partnership with various stakeholders. Among them, but not exclusively, are the following: United Nations Masterclass Webinar Series, workshops sponsored by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association and other agencies. Through strategic partnership, both the Parliament and the Tobago House of Assembly have created opportunities for young women to participate in leadership training. On March 8th, in honor of International Women's Day, the Assembly legislature convened the first all-female plenary. The program sought to institutionalize women's participation in governance by exposing them to training and experiences that raise their knowledge and understanding of related structures, policies, and practices. This event was a follow-up to one that the Parliament hosted previously. On March 8, 2020, Carry On Women in Leadership, CWIL, and Parliamericas, in collaboration with the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, hosted the first ever Young Women in Leadership Conference and attracted 58 national delegates. Following this event, the House of Representatives of Trinidad and Tobago convened the Young Women in Leadership Parliamentary Sit-in on March 9, 2020, the first time such a sit-in was held in our country. Participants served as legislators and officers in a debate and voted on a budget amendment bill generated through a simulated gender-responsive budgeting process. The simulated bill proposed fund reallocations predicated on the following gender equality priorities. 1, promoting gender equality through education. 2, continuing improvements to police response to gender-based violence. And 3, strengthening food security and climate change resilience for small-scale women farmers. While we acknowledge the progress made thus far, our Parliament is also cognizant the barriers to women's full participation in the legislative process still exist. However, there is a resolve to ultimately remove these barriers while also setting a positive example for society by making deliberate efforts within our Parliament to promote full political equality for women and men. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, co-sponsors, for your support and your very interesting and remarkable remarks. In today's meeting, as we mentioned earlier, we will be looking at a decade's worth of progress and developments in gender-sensitive parliaments. Each session will be introduced by an expert panelist who will discuss an overview of developments over the past 10 years in relation to respective gender-sensitive parliaments elements. Selected MPs, panelists will then lead in sharing their experiences on implementing policies towards the respective elements and gender-sensitive parliaments in general. After each panel, we will open the discussions to interventions from the floor. So let's now proceed with the first session on women's access to parliamentary leadership positions, establishing and implementing internal measures. And I invite Dr. Yulia Nitisova, Chief of Democratic Governance and Gender Unit Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, to share her knowledge on the topic. And if I may say that you have 4 minutes, please.
Dear Madam Chairperson, I would like to ask for a minute to start sharing the screen. Please, apologies for this. I think this should be, do you have a good visual now?
Yes, we see
Thank you so much, excellent. So dear Madam Chairperson Fayez, dear honorable members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, warm greetings from Warsaw, Poland. My name is Yulia Nitisova. I'm Chief of Democratic Governance and Gender Unit of OEC ODIHR. ODIHR is an international organization that covers 57 participating states, mostly in Northern Hemisphere. Some of our participating states are here. However, it's a great honor to be with other countries as well. And congratulations to the organizers of this event, to our dear colleagues in IPU, UN Women, and thanks a lot to the sponsoring organizations in the United Nations. Many important countries here whose delegates were really advancing fundamental documents and decisions over the last 60 years, to which all of us, we own a lot in terms of women's rights. I will briefly present to you work that ODIHR has been doing for the last decade, following in the footsteps of IPU and the Gender Action Plan. You can see here on this slide that I'm sharing 2 of our milestone publications. Initially, ODIHR went in with a bit narrow approach, working with women caucuses, studying them and strengthening. And on your right, you can see a comparative study of structures for women MPs. It's still available on our website. Following this work, we continued in a more expanded way, doing gender audits of parliaments. We worked in North Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, Malta. This year, we are working in Central Asia, potentially Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, advancing international standards that look into numbers and not only. Of course, we also look into the issues of women access to leadership positions and the barriers that women keep facing. A bit of numbers for the OEC space, 57 states. You can see on my slide that currently we do have 30% as an average number across the Northern Hemisphere participating states. It is a progress, but it is a bit slow. Out of 57, 28 states did reach the 30% cutoff benchmark set up by UN. I'm very pleased to say that even though the average is 30%, we can also see that the average for leadership positions such as women speakers and women SGs is higher, so 35 and 36% accordingly. This sort of gives us hope that even though we do not have that many women in politics, there is still a chance through certain measures to increase the access to leadership posts. For you to know, in our work, OEC and ODIHR, we always advocate to participating states to adopt temporary affirmative measures, because this is the only evidence-based tool that means there will be more women in politics and in leadership positions. Some lessons learned from our side based on our programmatic work. Parliaments still depend on political parties, their decisions. These are gatekeepers of the democracy, hence transforming political parties is a key step to ensure that women's potential also in leadership positions is being utilized. As mentioned, more women in politics means more women in leadership positions. And the last lesson learned, let's say, we understand that parliaments are very formal institutions, and sometimes the best way to go in advancing gender balance is to go through amending the formal rules of procedure. And one of the cases I cite here is reform of the rules of procedure in Montenegro. You can find this case study in the publication that I shared on the first page with you. And in order to take action, 3 basic steps from our side. Political will is key, hence we always try to advance when there is a political opening, when there is support at the very top of the country, management. Second is that conducting gender assessments, audits, it makes underrepresentation visible and it cannot be denied. As a next step, adopting parliamentary gender action plan helps to identify concrete reform steps, and it can be a gradual cycle that countries can go through many times. And this is how we work with our participating states, also by engaging women's rights movements and civil society. I'm afraid I've exhausted my 4 minutes. Very happy to take any questions, and please check out our publication, and we will have a launch event in the end of this month, also with colleagues from UN Women and IPU on gender-sensitive parliaments in OSCE space. Thank you very much, and looking forward to more discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Nitisova, for your presentation, very informative. And now we will open the floor for discussions. Those who would like to participate can use raise hand. And please try to limit your participation to 2 minutes so that we can give the floor to as many as we can. We would like you to share your perspective, the perspective from your country's experience on gender sensitive parliaments. I now call on Vice President of Parlasem, Vice President Parlasem.
Hello.
Okay. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Go ahead, please.
Excelentísimos representantes de ONU Mujeres, ¿vale? Excelentísimos representantes de la Unión Interparlamentaria, honorables compañeras diputadas y compañeros diputados, distinguidas y distinguidos participantes. En mi calidad de vicepresidenta y en nombre del presidente Guillermo Ortega Reyes y de las y los diputados del Parlamento Centroamericano, me es grato saludarles, agradecer y felicitar a la Unión Interparlamentaria y a ONU Mujeres por esta noble y notable reunión sobre los avances en los últimos 10 años respecto al papel de las mujeres parlamentarias y parlamentos sensibles al género. El Parlasem está integrado por 123 diputadas y diputados democráticamente electos en los 6 países que lo conforman. 43 diputadas representamos a los partidos políticos de la región dentro del Parlasem. Esto significa un 36% del total de los diputados. Históricamente, por primera vez en esta junta directiva, se compone de 7 diputadas de los 12 miembros. Canalizamos nuestras acciones políticas en toda la región a través de la Comisión de la Niñez, la Mujer, Juventud y Familia, el Bloque de Mujeres Parlamentarias y el Foro Centroamericano de Mujeres de Partidos Políticos con sus 6 foros nacionales. Asimismo, contamos con una unidad de género para el seguimiento técnico de estos temas. Hemos elaborado propuestas y acciones concretas junto a organizaciones internacionales de mujeres. trasladamos estas propuestas a los parlamentos nacionales, al Consejo de Ministras de la Mujer del Sistema de la Integración Centroamericano, SICA, que lo integran los 8 países de la región, y en muchas ocasiones estas son elevadas a la reunión de presidentes, lo cual se ha constituido en una red a nivel político y social en Centroamérica y la República Dominicana. Es muy importante en nuestro trabajo respetar las diferentes opiniones, centrarse en las prioridades comunes, garantizar la continuidad en el trabajo, contar con el apoyo de expertos y expertas, recibir el asesoramiento de organizaciones internacionales como ONU Mujeres, con la que tenemos intercambios frecuentes. Esto ha sido solamente un avance y falta mucho por hacer para una mayor y real apertura de género en los parlamentos. El futuro está en las mujeres y hombres en igualdad de condiciones, de derechos y de oportunidades reales. Tenemos la gran responsabilidad de transformar a nuestros parlamentos en instituciones más sensibles al género. Solo me resta decir que cuentan con nosotros las diputadas y diputados del Parlacén. No descansaremos en este largo camino futuro de representación y así poder hacer el cambio en la región ísmica e insular. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Dr. Aida Nassif from Egypt. Dr. Aida Nassif. Okay.
الو
I think we...
سامعاني دكتور؟
دكتور عايدة تفضلي.
عفوا. شكر وتقدير لكل منظمي الحدث، وشكرا لحضرتك، وشكرا للاتحاد البرلماني الدولي وهيئة الأمم المتحدة، وسعيدة بالمشاركة مع كل زميلاتي الفضليات من الدول الموجودة. بالطبع بتمثل النساء والفتيات نصف سكان العالم، وبالتالي نصف إمكانياته، فالمساواة بين الجنسين إلى جانب كونها حق أساسي من حقوق الإنسان فهو أمر ضروري لتحقيق السلام في المجتمعات. فقد تبين أن تمكين المرأة يحفز الإنتاج والسلام والنمو الاقتصادي. وفي بلدي مصر في الحقيقة شهدت المرأة المصرية إنجازات عديدة وقدر من الاهتمام لم تناله في أي عهد سابق، وخاصة في ال8 سنوات السابقة، حيث أظهرت القيادة السياسية انحيازها للمرأة المصرية ومساندتها لكافة حقوقها واعتزامها العمل على التمكين لها في المجتمع المصري والمساواة الجندرية. فإذا نظرنا إلى المرأة في البرلمان نجد أن النسبة غير مسبوقة، فقد وصلت في برلمان 2020 27%، بعد أن كانت في سنة 2010 3% و2015 14%. ونجد في الحقيقة أن هي ممثلة في لجان مهمة بالبرلمان استطعنا بجهدهن تغيير خارطة الطريق التشريعية، وأسرينا العمل النيابي بكثير من الأطروحات والأفكار التي تؤكد وعي المرأة وإدراكها لحجم المسؤوليات السياسية والاجتماعية والاقتصادية وغيرها، حيث قامت المرأة وشرعت كثير من القوانين من خلال عملها في البرلمان، زي قانون الأحوال الشخصية، قانون تنظيم عمل المجلس القومي للمرأة، تغليظ عقوبة التحرش، تجريم الحرمان من الميراث، مكافحة الجرائم الإلكترونية من بينها التحرش، إلى جانب إقرار تكافؤ الفرص بين الجنسين في قانون الاستثمار. وفي الحقيقة ده كان ليه انعكاسه على نسبة المرأة في الحكومة، حيث تقلدت المرأة المصرية أعلى المناصب السياسية في آخر تشكيل وزاري وصلت إلى نسبة 25%، ووصلت المرأة أيضا في مصر إلى منصب المحافظ ونائب المحافظ، بل وصلت بالرغم من صعوبة وصول المرأة إلى منصب قاضية على مر السنوات، ولكن تمكنت المرأة المصرية أن تثبت قدرتها على أن تكون قاضية، واعتلت منصة القضاء. في الحقيقة كمان بنجد نتيجة الانعكاس عمل المرأة أيضا في البرلمان والإرادة السياسية، نجد مستشار الرئيس للأمن القومي. والبرلمانيات في البرلمان بجانب عملهم في التشريع والقوانين والمسار الإيجابي، نجد إن هم بيشجعوا كمان مؤسسات المجتمع المدني وبيساندوهم في عمل مبادرات سواء على المستوى الاقتصادي أو المستوى الصحي أو المستوى الثقافي لتحقيق المساواة الجندرية. ونأمل طبعا في المستقبل أن يكون هناك تقدم أكبر للمرأة على المستوى المحلي في مصر وعلى المستوى الإقليمي وعلى المستوى العالمي. شكرا لحضراتكم.
شكرا دكتورة عايدة. Thank you Dr. Aida.
شكرا لحضرتك.
Just a small note, we will be taking the next four who have requested the floor. After that, we will need to move to the next session. And please try to limit your intervention to 2 minutes so that we can take as much as possible. The others who have raised their hands, you can participate in the following sessions. Next, I will give the floor to Madam from Thailand.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to share some of Thailand's experiences on this topic. Gender responsive parliament has been recognized in the Thai parliament, both in the parliamentary and at administrative levels. The current number of women in the parliament, especially the number of members of the House of Representatives, is resulted from a gender-sensitive provision of the Constitution and its organic law on political parties, which requires political parties to take gender equality into consideration when preparing their list of candidates. The visible increase in number of the women party list MPs from 19 in previous election to 25 the latest election was byproduct of the said constitutional provision. Besides, the number of executive officers of the secretariats of both houses are almost 50%, with the current secretaries general of both houses are female. In addition, both houses have issued the code of conduct of members of parliament and its committees members. The provisions therein have been set out the standards of expected behavior of members, especially the code of conduct of members of the Senate explicitly prohibits sexual harassment at work as a clear breach of conduct. In terms of the number of women leaders in local administration in Thailand, the provincial administrative organization election was held in 2020. It was one of the major political events in Thailand as the country's first subnational electoral exercise since 2014. The number of chief executives of provincial administrative organization rose from 9 in 2017 to 12 in 2020. And PAOs are responsible for public services such as roads, bridges, sewage system, and electricity at the provincial level. Last election, 12 provincial administrative organizer chairperson seats from 76 seats of provinces occupied by women, or 9% of all chairperson seats. Recently, the same-sex marriage bill has been tabled to the House of Representatives of Thailand, one of the country's historic legislative initiatives. The draft bill seeks to modify the definition of marriage specified in the Civil and Commercial Code from a union of men and women to two persons to ensure equal rights for everyone. However, this bill is now being further reviewed by the Cabinet before resubmitting to the Parliament later this year. Last but not least, the Thai IPU National Group is now examining the draft of its new rules with the introduction of gender balance concept and youth participation in line with the IPU's guidelines and practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam from UK.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it is absolutely amazing to be part of the session today with so many parliamentary colleagues from such a huge variety of countries around the world. It really is an uplifting moment of the week. I'm voicing my support for gender-sensitive Parliament audits. We undertook our first in the UK in 2018, and that has been reviewed by our Women and Equalities Select Committee only a matter of 2 weeks ago. We are making progress in the UK Parliament, but it is slow. And we are maybe an established and ancient Parliament, but there are still double the number of men compared with women elected to our Parliament here in the UK. So obviously the electorate judge political parties at the ballot box at elections, but I think it's important we consider how parliaments are held to account for the progress they make. And certainly I'd be interested in the experience of colleagues around the world on how they affect that accountability in Parliament, because it's not a process that my Parliament has in place, and we're struggling for how we can ensure the important findings from our audits are actually put into practice. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Next, we have Madam from Serbia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to address you today. My name is Ivana Popovic, and I'm a member of National Assembly of Serbia. We have done so much in the past years when it comes to gender-sensitive topics in our parliament and also in our political stage in general. Our parliament has done a great change from the last assembly. We have around 40 new and young MPs in our country, and we also have more than 40% of women in our parliament. When it comes to legal and policy framework on gender equality, the Constitution of the Republic of Serbia from 2006 sets the legal basis for the regulation of gender equality and establishes gender equality as a fundamental constitutional right. Serbia has made enormous strides in developing a comprehensive legal and policy framework on gender equality. Recent landmarks advances include the adoption of the new and long-awaited law on gender equality at the end of May 2021. This has been voted in last assembly that I also have been member of, and I have been very proud to be the one to vote for this law. Serbia has also advanced significantly in attempts to maintain gender throughout the public sector, in particular throughout gender responsive budgeting, which is mandatory since 2015. As many of you probably know, we have in a couple of weeks elections in our country, presidential and also parliamentary, and we have done so much when it comes to electoral gender quota. Parliaments need to lead the way on gender equality, and the National Assembly of Serbia has already gone a long way to fulfill that aspiration. We were persistently advocating for such solutions for years, not because we want to meet a quota, but because we know very well how important it is to have as many women as possible in the decision-making processes, professionals ready to invest their creativity and life experience into public and social interests. Something that I personally want to point out is that we have in our National Assembly minimally 40% of the women candidates on these new lists that we are going to have on our elections, and with strong and continued efforts such as these, we hope that further amendments to the law on MPs would lead to gender parity. Actually,
if you can summarize, please, we need to.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. I know we have so many achievements that I would like to point out. That's why those 2 minutes were a little too little for me. Something that I wanted to point out is that in our government at this very moment, we have more than 50% of women ministers. And something that we are deeply proud is that we have our Prime Minister, our Ana Brnabić, as a woman and the first leader who is governing at the moment. We have a very good support from our president when it comes, and that would be something that I'm summarizing at this very moment. Thank you so much for your attention, and hope that we will have fulfill further actions when it comes to gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last for this session, I call on Madame France, please. The rest can join, can participate in the next sessions. Go ahead.
Merci,
please.
thank you. Merci, bonjour à toutes et tous, et merci de nous permettre d'échanger très nombreux et nombreuses sur nos expériences dans nos pays. Donc, je suis sénatrice en France. Je voulais faire un petit point, tout d'abord, vous dire l'évolution du nombre de femmes au Sénat au cours de ces dernières années. Peut-être revenir sur il y a 10 ans. Puisque nous avons parlé des 10 ans du plan d'action, eh bien, il y a 10 ans, il n'y avait que 22% de femmes au sein du Sénat. Et puis, au dernier renouvellement, en octobre 2020, eh bien, ce nombre de femmes a augmenté, puisque nous sommes maintenant à 35% de femmes. Vous voyez, progressivement, année après année, les choses évoluent. Ce sont 15% de femmes sénatrices en plus depuis ce dernier renouvellement. Le bureau du Sénat affiche une féminisation, par contre, sans précédent, puisque plus de 46% de sénateurs, sénatrices sont des femmes au sein du bureau, le lieu aussi de nombreuses responsabilités. Il y a une parité totale au sein des 8 vice-présidents. 4 d'entre elles sont des femmes vice-présidentes. S'agissant des commissions du Sénat, la commission la plus féminisée est celle consacrée aux affaires sociales, 60% sont des femmes. La commission des lois, ensuite, arrive en deuxième place avec 43% de femmes, puis la commission de la culture, la commission des affaires économiques, puis la commission de l'aménagement du territoire et du développement durable. Pour autant, il faut signaler que 2 commissions sont peu féminisées. Il s'agit de la commission des affaires étrangères et de la défense et de la commission des finances. Et concernant les présidences de ces commissions, eh bien, elles sont majoritairement masculines. Donc, vous voyez qu'il y a encore du travail à faire. Et s'agissant de la féminisation au sein des groupes politiques, elle varie beaucoup selon la taille, ou on va dire l'appartenance de ces groupes. En ce qui concerne mon groupe, je suis membre du groupe socialiste, nous sommes à la 2e place avec 37% de femmes. Donc il y a, en vous disant tout cela, du progrès encore, de la marge d'action. Vous dire aussi que nous avons travaillé au sein du Sénat et de la délégation sénatoriale aux droits des femmes sur des recommandations, des propositions pour faire évoluer aussi et progresser la place des femmes dans les différentes instances politiques de décision, au Parlement certes, au Sénat particulièrement, mais aussi dans les collectivités locales, les communes, les intercommunalités, en zone urbaine comme en zone rurale. Enfin, pour conclure, pour ne pas être trop longue, eh bien, un message particulier en vous disant que je pense que le renforcement de l'accès des femmes au mandat et aux responsabilités électives est un véritable gage d'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes qui souhaitent s'engager en politique. Parce que c'est bien comme ça qu'on donnera envie et qu'on pourra faire avancer les choses. La parité permet en effet de réoxygéner la démocratie, j'en suis convaincue. Il s'agit aussi d'une vraie attente de nos concitoyens qui nous appartient en tant qu'élus, femmes et hommes, dans toutes nos familles politiques, au Sénat comme à l'Assemblée en France, mais j'ai envie de dire aussi de par le monde et votre présence, mais il s'agit là de ne pas décevoir. Je vous remercie.
Thank you all for your interventions. And now we need to move on to the next session, session 2. where we're discussing adopting and implementing gender provisions in parliamentary policies, including anti-harassment policies. And I'm pleased to invite Ms. Marosa Gortanar, Head of Operations, European Institute for Gender Equality, EIGE, to share her knowledge on the topic.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dear organizers and colleagues, compliments for organizing today's event and discussion with women and men with first-hand experience, so the members of the parliaments. It's an honor to be with you today and represent the European Institute for Gender Equality. We are an autonomous EU agency with a mandate to provide data and evidence, develop methods and practical tools for mainstreaming gender into different policy areas, and to promote gender equality in the European Union and beyond. And one of our tools, which was launched in 2018, was a gender-sensitive parliaments online tool. This tool is designed as a self-assessment exercise for parliaments. And in 2019, EIGE collected data and also published a report on the state of the European Parliament and national parliaments in terms of their gender sensitivity. And for this session, I would like to share a few key findings. First, on gender provisions in parliamentary policies. Gender mainstreaming structures are crucial for gender-sensitive parliaments, as they promote that women's interests and concerns have adequate space on parliamentary agendas. And they also increase the level of attention paid to the promotion of gender equality in the regular work of Parliament. What our study has shown, the European Parliament and the majority of member states, more than 70%, have a dedicated gender equality body in their parliamentary structure. However, only in 12, it is a parliamentary committee or a subcommittee with full legislative capacity. In the remainder of the parliaments, these bodies have an advisory function. Within the European Parliament, the FEM committee is responsible for promoting, monitoring and protecting women's rights in the EU and in non-member countries. And FEM committee also lacks legislative power. For legislative power, in addition to the adoption of gender mainstreaming action plans by most committees, the introduction of the so-called gender mainstreaming amendments enables the committee, the FEM committee, to include a gender perspective in the reports of other committees. Regardless of the type of gender equality structure in place, the use of gender mainstreaming methods and tools is not institutionalized, and gender does not appear to be effectively mainstreamed in parliamentary work. Despite being formally committed to achieving gender equality and ensuring gender mainstreaming in all budgetary procedures, gender budgeting is also not systematically applied, be it in the European Parliament or majority of the national parliaments. Only 5 national parliaments of the member states have implemented a form of gender budgeting in relation to the national budget. A few words on the second topic, on the anti-harassment policies. The Council of Europe conducted a study in 2019, which indicated the presence of psychological and sexual harassment in the European national parliaments. And such harassment is widely experienced by women members of the parliament as well as staff. And as it is the case in the other forms of gender-based violence, the level of reporting is rather low. However, in the context of the rise of the Me Too movement, the European Parliament introduced some measures to create a safer working environment for women and men, and also to prompt member states to follow. Since February 2019, the European Parliament's rules of procedure have referred to a standard of conduct, which requires members to refrain from any type of psychological or sexual harassment. Members must cooperate promptly and fully with the procedures to manage situations of harassment, be it psychological or sexual, and members should take part in specialized training on preventing conflict and harassment at the workplace. However, a pilot voluntary training program in November 2018 attracted only 19 members of the European Parliament. So there is a need to promote uptake of such training. With the introduction of these measures in the European Parliament, further efforts, further measures are encouraged and needed. At the national levels, only 9 member states have publicly available information on the existence of mechanisms to prevent gender-based discrimination, such as codes of conduct or anti-harassment policies. But they do not always include sanctions for non-compliance. As this is the case in most national parliaments of the European Union, members of the parliaments and employees may not be adequately protected against such conduct. To conclude, as it was mentioned already before during today's event, we need comparable and reliable data on gender equality, taking into account also intersectionality. And AGE will continue providing the evidence for policy and decision makers, also on the issue discussed today. We will continue monitoring and assessment of the gender sensitivity of the European Parliament and national parliaments and complement this activity with practical guide for the development of action plans. And this will be done in a view of European elections in 2024. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward for further discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Gortner, for your continuous efforts. Next, I invite Ms. Marta Lucia Mitchell Camarena, Senator from Mexico, to give us her intervention, please.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días desde México, desde el Senado mexicano. Les enviamos un cordial saludo a todas y a todas las parlamentarias que están participando y a las personas de la sociedad civil y gente que nos acompaña. Bueno, decirles que nuestro Senado y nuestra Constitución es una Constitución paritaria. La paridad está en la Constitución mexicana de los Estados Unidos. Mexicanos. Es el segundo país después de Ruanda que tiene su Constitución reformada para la paridad. Es decir, tenemos paridad a nivel federal, estatal y municipal, así como en los 3 poderes, en el poder ejecutivo, en el poder legislativo y en el poder judicial. Todas las listas de candidaturas tienen que ser paritarias en todos los niveles, en los niveles municipales como en los niveles nacionales, en todas las listas de diputaciones del Senado, en todo el país. Ya no hay cuota. Paridad es igualdad. Y es una reforma que aprobamos por unanimidad en este Senado y en este Congreso mexicano. Saludo con mucho gusto a mis senadoras que están integradas a esta reunión de todos los partidos, porque por unanimidad hemos sacado todas las reformas. Quiero decirles que nosotras ya no le llamamos parlamentos sensibles al género. Nosotras consideramos que es parlamentos con perspectiva de género, y hemos incorporado la perspectiva de género en todos nuestros dictámenes, en todo nuestro trabajo, y por ello tenemos una unidad técnica que es muy importante para la igualdad de género al interior del Senado y al interior de varias dependencias. ¿De qué se encarga esta unidad técnica para la igualdad de género? Pues se encarga precisamente de prevenir, atender y erradicar la violencia y también de sensibilizar y capacitar a todo el personal para evitar prácticas de acoso y de violencia al interior y tener una cultura institucional sin discriminación y sin violencia para las mujeres. Pero quiero decirles también lo que hemos logrado con estos lentes que nos hemos puesto las parlamentarias en materia de perspectiva de género. Además de tener la paridad en la Constitución, hemos legislado en la violencia política contra las mujeres en razón de género hemos logrado que los delitos de abuso, de lenocinio, de pederastia, de pornografía, de violación o de corrupción de menores sea evidentemente catalogado como imprescriptible. Es decir, esta gravedad del hecho ya no es, ya no pasaron años y por lo tanto ya no puedes denunciarlo. Es imprescriptible. También tenemos una gran ley que aprobamos desde hace 17 años, la Ley General de Acceso a una Vida Libre de Violencias, en la que incorporamos todas las violencias, la física, la económica y por supuesto la violencia feminicida que hemos ido tratando de que se vaya en los estados profundizando en su investigación y por supuesto en el acceso a la justicia de las mujeres. Y también hemos legislado algo muy importante, hemos aprobado el convenio 190 sobre la eliminación de la violencia y el acoso en el mundo del trabajo. Y nos sentimos muy obligadas y muy, pues dijéramos, muy honradas de haber legislado en materia de igualdad salarial y del reconocimiento al trabajo en el hogar. Eso es muy importante porque ya ratificamos el convenio 189. En fin, aquí en este país estamos trabajando muchísimo desde el Senado y desde la Cámara de Diputados, desde la paridad en una perspectiva de género y una política exterior feminista. Tenemos una ley del servicio exterior también con perspectiva de género que está por aprobarse, pero nos sentimos muy honradas, muy contentas de participar con ustedes y de participarles a ustedes este Congreso paritario. Por su atención, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you for your very inspiring words. Lastly, I invite Ms. Sylvia Elizabeth Lucas, Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces of South Africa, to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. All honored delegates present here. Let me start to say it is indeed an honor to be part of this discussion on our plan of action for the gender equal parliamentarians. As parliamentarians, we need to continuously, robustly assess and determine what has changed and what remains unchanged with regards to the transformation of gender roles in society in general and in parliament in particular. South Africa as a country has progressed and is ranked as one of the most gender diverse parliaments across the globe, ranked 3rd in Africa and 10th in the world. According to our parliament's current composition, the National Assembly comprises of 46% of women representatives and the National Council of Provinces of 36%. After the 2019 elections, women representation increased from 30% to 43% at the provincial level. The largest proportion of women parliamentarians in provincial legislatures is in the Limpopo province, where we find 53% of parliamentarians in that legislature is women. It has even surpassed the South African Development Community's parity target. The above mentioned statistics are due to the political will that was shown by the governing party, which has demanded that the gender machinery be strengthened and gender equality be deepened and advanced by ensuring that 50% representation in decision-making structures be implemented. Chairperson, in 2019, at the inaugural Women's Parliament of the 6th dispensation of the South African Parliament, a resolution was taken by the women of the country that Parliament should undertake an extensive review of the 1994 Women's Charter for Effective Equality. The 25-year review intentionally leaned towards assessing the state's internal arrangements, its institutional processes, the efficacy of development policies, including legislative and intergovernmental fiscal arrangements, in order to assess whether the state machinery had been appropriately structured since the advent of democracy to serve the interests of the women of South Africa. After we have undertaken the review, we launched the 2021 Women's Charter for Accelerated Development, which is the current demand document for the women of South Africa. It contains 15 strategic priorities, which covers all strategic matters that are pertinent for the advancement of gender transformation and women's social, political, and economic empowerment, including a response to gender-based violence and femicide. In 2022, our Parliament will proceed to create the appropriate oversight mechanisms across the 3 spheres of government in order to track the implementation of the Women's Charter on a quarterly basis. One of the key pillars of our review process was its underpinning law reform pillar, through which Parliament sought to identify key policies and legislation for review as guided by their centrality in the process to advance gender equality. The principal intention was to identify gaps in key policies and legislation that are employed for realizing gender equality, in order to advance recommendations for the amendment of such key policies and legislative instruments. Parliament is implementing the next phase of the law reform process, which is to engage important stakeholders across the state machinery, including social partners, on the amendment of key policies and legislation, thereby inculcating a gender-sensitive policy and legislative paradigm in the rule of law. To this end, one of the key policy instruments that were highlighted as requiring urgent and extensive review and amendment is the National Gender Policy Framework, particularly given the evolved policy and developmental landscape in South Africa, which has further been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Chairperson, the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa has further launched a men's parliament in order to create a platform where men can talk about issues relating to gender-based violence, patriarchy, including toxic masculinity and its impact on society. These men's parliaments have been launched at all levels of government in order to ensure that men across the country engage in open dialogue about psychosocial, cultural, traditional entrenchments of gender discrimination, which hinder tangible progress in the eradication of gender inequality. It is therefore imperative that we establish men's parliaments across our parliament in order to ensure that while the women parliamentary forums meet to unpack barriers to transformation, male MPs can also convene to ensure that they devise targeted strategies to address the institutional practices and norms which continue to entrench gender disparities and inequality. To this end, while legislative houses are expected to function as the beacons of equality and human dignity, gender discriminatory practices, violence against women, bullying and harassment also coexist and survive under the most progressive political systems. Male MPs must therefore fully commit to make a firm contribution to eradicate gender discrimination and patriarchy. The eradication of patriarchy and its violent manifestations.
Sorry, madam, if we can wrap up, please.
You want me to wrap up? I just want to further mention that we also have multi-party women's caucuses where women of all the different political parties gather and discuss issues and agree on the on how to address the issues of gender equality and women oppression that are still continuing to prevail. In conclusion, the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa continues to mainstream gender equality through its work, and we continue to strive to equip both our public reps and as well as our staff with the capacity and resources to promote equality. Parliament has sound policies and systems in place to fight against harassment, gender-based violence, and inequality amongst genders. Even the parliamentary staff have got the forums where they can discuss gender equality, where they can discuss how we address harassment and other policies that help the institution to make sure that we establish a culture of gender equality and a culture of safety and security for our women staff members. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lucas. And now we'll open the floor for discussions. We will take 2 interventions and kindly try to limit it to 2 minutes so that we can go ahead with our program. I call on Ms. Anna Karmanali.
Good afternoon from Greece, from Athens. Allow me to refer to the Greek state general horizontal policies and actions being implemented which empower women in their access to the labor market in the field of education, family, also on fighting domestic violence and helping to break down gender stereotypes and achieve substantial gender equality. The 2021 to 2025 National Action Plan for Gender Equality is a coherent set of policies that promotes the horizontal integration of the gender perspective in various sectoral policies under design and provides for a process of monitoring their implementation at central, local, and regional levels. The National Action Plan is organized around 4 thematic priorities: prevention and fight against gender and domestic violence, equal participation of women in decision-making position, and leadership roles. Third, equal participation of women in the labor market. And third, integration of gender dimension in sectoral options. This is the first time that Greece prepares, finances, and implements a horizontal national action plan with regard to the equal participation of women in decision-making position and leadership roles. The National Action Plan provides for policies and actions to increase the number of women in politics through inter alia legislative interventions for the use of quotas, promoting the participation of women in political bodies, increase awareness over the work of elected women, encouraging women to engage in public and community affairs, also establishing an observatory for women in politics participation, implementing women's skills development programs for public participation, enhancing girls' education and training for leadership roles. Relevant legislation has been enacted to prohibit all forms of violence and harassment in the workplace, and I have the honor to chair the Hellenic Parliament Special Standing Committee on Equality, Youth and Human Rights. Issues such as women in the digital age, the impact of crisis on women's health, workplace harassment and the legislation such as new family law provisions or new penal codes have been discussed in the framework of committee meetings, always in the spirit of constructive dialogue between the participants, which contributes substantially to the improvement of actions and policies. Closing, I would like to note the Hellenic Parliament's best practice of hosting a nursery school and a kindergarten in special facilities. The nursery school and the kindergarten are places of care and education for the children of Parliament employees, of members of Parliament, and other categories of employees on a case-by-case basis where appropriate and adapted to capacities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call on Madam from Senate of the Democratic Republic of Congo, please. 2 minutes, please.
Merci pour la parole. La sensibilité du Parlement de la République démocratique du Congo au genre se caractérise par la participation de la femme au processus décisionnel qui a connu une nette progression. Par rapport aux lois votées par notre Parlement, en prenant un échantillon du Sénat congolais, la législature passée, le taux de représentation était de 5% et dans la législature actuelle, le taux de participation est de 27,9%. Une montée exponentielle très considérable. Commission permanente qui compose le Sénat, 3 sont dirigées par les femmes. C'est entre autres la commission du genre, famille, des relations extérieures, ainsi que celle des entités territoriales décentralisées. Et actuellement, le bureau du Sénat est composé de 7 membres, dont 3 postes de décision sont dirigés par les femmes. Nous saluons cette évolution positive dans la dynamique de la réflexion, d'augmenter considérablement la participation des femmes au processus décisionnel, aussi bien en politique, aux affaires et même au sein de la société en général. La participation des femmes au processus décisionnel a connu une nette progression, ainsi qu'en témoignent les quelques statistiques. Au niveau du gouvernement, nous avons 23%, parmi lesquels une vice-première ministre et 2 ministres d'État. Au niveau du Sénat, nous l'avons souligné, plus haut, 3 femmes occupent des postes de commandement, ce qui n'est pas mince affaire au regard des clivages religieux, culturels, économiques. À l'Assemblée nationale, c'est une femme qui a dirigé le bureau pendant les 2 premières années. S'agissant du partenariat entre hommes et femmes pour promouvoir l'égalité de sexe, à ce propos, le Parlement de la République démocratique du Congo propose 3 pistes de réflexion, excusez-moi. Première unité positive. À l'occasion du sommet de novembre 2021 à Kinshasa sur la masculinité positive, la problématique doit être au haut niveau des instances, aussi bien nationales qu'internationales, en vue de sensibiliser tant les milieux éminents politiques que les milieux, que toutes les couches.
Excuse me, if you can conclude, please.
Oui, je comprends. Voilà, les femmes au Sénat ont fait preuve de maturité et de soutien à leurs collègues candidates à différents postes du bureau au Sénat. Elles ont eu à taire leur clivage politique pour ne privilégier que l'intérêt de la femme et donc promouvoir le genre. Chaque candidate féminine était appuyée par toutes les sénatrices, quel que soit leur parti politique, et cela est une avancée considérable dans la conséquence a été que tous les représentants qui cela démontre qu'ensemble, les femmes peuvent oxygéner l'avancée de la sensibilité du genre, ce qui nous pousse à espérer aux prochaines élections, la bataille sera rude. Parlant aussi de la garderie, excusez-moi madame, pour la garderie, ce problème ne se pose pas dans notre pays parce que chez nous en Afrique, nous avons toujours une solution par rapport à ça. Nous avons la facilité de trouver des travailleurs qu'on appelle des nounous pour prendre soin de nos enfants. Et il y a toujours un cousin, une cousine qui est toujours présente à la maison pour ces genres d'assistance. Merci.
Thank you. So we now will proceed with the third discussion on establishing childcare and family-friendly infrastructure in parliaments. And I'm pleased to invite Professor Sarah Childs, Professor of Politics and Gender at Royal Holloway at the University of London in the United Kingdom, to share her knowledge on the topic. And we have 4 minutes, please.
Good afternoon from the UK, and I'm just going to share my screen with you if I can. Start with the first one. I'd like to follow a number of people's comments, congratulating everybody for being here and for the 10 years and longer for gender-sensitive parliamentary work. I think it's very important that we all do take up the IPU's and Zaina's commitment to taking this forward. I think it really matters. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about how we turn our institutions into places that are family friendly and provide the kind of childcare that parents need, to recognise that this is both an intrinsic value to the Parliament as a place of work and as a place of democracy, but also to recognise that it matters that our parliaments showcase the very best provisions for parents, and particularly those who carry and maybe feeding those children in the early weeks and months of a baby's life, to actually recognise that role, to showcase to society how other institutions, organizations and places of work can also proceed to be better. So I'm going to talk a little bit in the background about how some of the changes that the Right Honourable Maria Miller mentioned when she spoke from the UK Parliament, how some things have changed in the UK Parliament, but also based on some of the work on gender sensitive parliaments I've also had the pleasure of undertaking with Sonia Palmieri from Australia, who of course was so critical to some of the early work too. So I won't talk a lot about the Good Parliament report, but it speaks to a report I undertook back in 2015-2016, offering a gender sensitive critique of the British House of Commons. And of course, what matters, I think, for today is for us to signal for the future work how we bring these gender-sensitive parliaments about, because identifying insensitivities and creating reforms and producing reports requires a subsequent step. And that's the step of making parliaments as parliaments take on that responsibility and ensuring that those of us who are advocating and active in engendering, instituting, instigating change can hold those who have the power to bring this change about to account for what they do and what they don't do. So in a sense, I'm speaking here to the question of how regendering work in our parliaments actually takes place. And of course, the IPU was very clear originally that this must not be left to women to do all the work, that we need to, and of course there is a session coming up about the role of men. But I think it's also important for us to think about parliaments as organizations with structure and leadership and governance, and we need to think about those things too. So as you can see here, my aims, but also some of the means that I benefited from in trying to identify those technically appropriate reforms. An MP's panel working for those who would champion and defend my work. We have to recognise too that gender sensitive parliamentary work can be costly at the individual level, but also at the reputational and collective level, that we might need technical input and therefore work with those in Parliament who can give us access to that. So most importantly, I want to talk about institutionalisation, identifying the actors and the means through which reforms are implemented and gender sensitive parliamentary standards are maintained. Again, Zaina recognised that parliaments have different capacities, different levels of political will and different resources. But within that, whatever a gender sensitive parliament agenda is created within a particular parliament, we need to make sure that we get those reforms implemented and that they are sustained. I think it's important we don't always assume that we have an upward trajectory, that there won't be contestation, there may not always be those who sympathise and wish to support. We might find ourselves in situations where governments want to push back and parliaments push back. And that matters for the success of gender sensitive parliaments. So whilst we celebrate what's been achieved in 10 years, whilst we celebrate so much of what's going on, it matters that we also recognise the possibility of less conducive contexts. So when we talk about institutionalisation, what we're talking here, and I will talk about this in the context of the slide behind me, process tracing, proxy voting for baby leave. There was a problem in the British Parliament. Members of Parliament who had had babies or were caring for newborn babies were not able to participate in voting. And what then happened was the efforts of a group of people, starting with a particular group of MPs at the time, the Commons Reference Group, who had come together to push forward the gender sensitive parliament in the House of Commons. But also we worked with the leader of the House, the Speaker of the House. We had to bring in the procedure committee, a committee who are designated to undertake inquiries into how parliaments may undertake their work differently. We actually also worked with extra parliamentary actors, but also to think about how sometimes one has to recognise happenstance. Luck is too positive a word, but we had a number of occasions where experiences of women who were pregnant really highlighted the problem and in a sense triggered, I think, the kind of responses that needed to be made. So a change in formal rules. Another speaker spoke about the extent to which we rely on changing rules and rely on changing culture and how they are intimately intertwined. And we too need to think about that when we're looking to bring about childcare provisions with our parliaments. And so if I summarize here some of these actors and processes of gender sensitizing a parliament, how do we bring about a gender sensitive parliament? And I think when we're talking about childcare and family friendly provisions, we have a number of data lacks. We need to start studying and documenting, monitoring motherhood gaps in our parliaments, not just gender gaps. Are we making our parliaments open to all kinds of women? We need to recognise much more systematically the needs of the parent MP, whether that's feeding, hours of a parliament, changing areas, the rules, the particular rules of perhaps staying present in a debate for a long time. We need systematic data collection on the parental insensitive practices of our parliament as part of our gender sensitive parliamentary work. We need a much better and systematic capturing of the best practice around the world. People are often talking, whether that's academics or members of parliament, trying to find out what best practice exists. And one of the things I think as we move into this next 10-year process is that we need to recognise that we need to fill in the data, we need to share best practice, and we need to really think about how we institutionalise practices of gender sensitive parliaments. Gendered parliamentarianism, by what I mean by that is when women come together and work as members of a parliament to transform their places of work, can be critical. But we also need to recognise those in positions of power who can bring about change, the critical actors and the allies. But also we might, and this I think is something I'm very interested in hearing if people are able to today or perhaps in later sessions, about what we can do to add to, augment our parliaments to make sure that the political will is captured in an organisation or an institution, a speakers advisory group, parliamentary advisory group, women's caucuses, the kind of actual practical organisations that will hold on to the gender sensitive parliament agenda and make sure those other actors, those with the power, whether that's the speaker, the leaders of houses, the administration, to really bring about our parliamentary institutions to ones that not just welcome women, but also provide for the needs of the parent MP. And I'll stop there so I don't go over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Charles, for your very informative talk, really. Next, I invite Ms. Louisa Wall, member of the House of Representatives of New Zealand and member of the IPU Bureau of Women Parliamentarians, to give her intervention, please.
Kia ora, and greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Ngā mihi me ngā mana whenua o te ao. I also want to greet our Indigenous peoples and say kia kaha, stay strong to the people of the Ukraine. Can I first begin by thanking the IPU, UN Women and the missions of Canada and Uganda for this opportunity. Happy 10th anniversary to us all in terms of the implementation of the Plan for Action for Gender Sensitive Parliaments. Can I also thank Professor Charles, who has introduced this session incredibly well. From New Zealand's perspective, the drivers for change within our Parliament, or from my perspective, the institutional mechanisms to ensure our Parliament is gender sensitive, responds to the needs of women and families, and removes the barriers for women's full participation within our parliamentary institution, arise from our triennial review of standing orders. So every parliamentary term, we review the standing orders. We also are very engaged within the IPU, and I thank the IPU Secretariat again, and also forums like the Commission on the Status of Women, and also from our Parliament, the Australasian Study of Parliament group, where we've enabled these types of debates. Within the context of our Parliament, we are 48% women, and two of our political parties, the Labour Party, which I belong to, has a constitutional requirement for 50% of our caucus to be women, and the Greens are actually currently 70% women, but they operate on a 40-40-20 system and have a zebra list. Within that context, we also have a Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians group, and so our political parties are able to work cross-party, and there is consultation with women parliamentarians to initiate, for example, an independent inquiry into bullying and harassment that happened within our parliament in 2018. A cross-party committee, culture committee, has been convened to implement recommendations. And so from our perspective, we have quite a bit of institutional now capacity to deal with the issues that we're trying to address within this particular event. I have to highlight that we've had childcare facilities since the 1990s, and we've also had a family room, so that families have always been seen as participating within the context of our parliament. In terms of the standing orders changes that we've made, we allow for compassionate leave. So women who are pregnant or women who have had children are given parental leave, which doesn't affect the voting and our ability to cast proxy votes. We also allow for remote participation, which essentially allows women to work from home. And we have allowed infants in our chamber since 2017, which enables mothers to breastfeed, for example, and partners or family members are allowed into the lobbies of our parliament to facilitate that process. In terms of our engagement and being friendly with the public, we have a parliamentary playground, and we actually invite families to come to our playground so that it is a family-friendly environment. And just finally, our biggest challenge actually is travel, and our parliament support for our spouses, for our family members, for our children to be able to be with us in parliament. It's an ongoing discussion, and it currently is a big focus within the context of our women caucuses, and we are progressing that as we speak. Just the final thing I want to say, I take the challenge from the UK. We have yet to undertake a gender-sensitive parliament audit, so it's something that I will write to the Speaker about and put on our agenda. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Ms. Wall, for the very informative talk also. And lastly, I call on Ms. Ravza Kafachikan, member of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, to take the floor, please.
Thank you so much. I wish everybody a good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on where you are. And I hope that everybody is in good health since we're dealing with the pandemic. I wanted to thank Ms. Fayez for the wonderful moderation, and Zaina and UN Women and Canada and Mexico for sponsoring this event. It's nice to see all of you. Hope to see you all in person soon. So I will talk about the topic of childcare and family-friendly parliaments. So I wanted to take the IPU because we just opened, and the organizers, because recently a new childcare facility was opened within the infrastructure of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. We have one, and I'll open my presentation right now. Here it is. I hope you're able to see it. Okay. All right, I'll just try to go from here. So the Grand National Assembly of Turkey has, I wanted to let you see the photos as well. The nursery has been working since 1987, and it's been in the same building for 35 years, but recently it was moved to the campus of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, which was a great need actually. So the nursery and kindergarten serves both the children of MPs as well as the people who are working, our staff who are working with us in the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. I spoke to one of my colleagues our member of parliament from the beautiful city of Trabzon, and she had her baby while she became a member of parliament. So she enjoys sending her child there, and also one of my teammates in the Grand National Assembly of Turkey here working with me also sends his daughter there, so they're happy with the services. So you can see from the slide that it was built on 705,000 meters square land, 3 floors, and there's living area. Right now it has a capacity of 350 children, but right now there are 249 registered children. So we hold a family-friendly parliamentary approach at the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. So it's a great opportunity to have the members of parliament who have small children at daycare age, as well as staff, be able to work in an area close to where the child care facilities are. And also one of the great things we have here is we have a great botanic garden. So also the daycare has a separate area within the campus where they are able to use that. It was just as I was walking through the daycare facilities before this presentation, I was just excited to see the areas where the children were getting their education and spending time. So there is different classes for age 3, 4, and the elder children. So the classes are designed, of course, according to their needs. And there's mind game classes, visual arts classes, drama class, science of nature class. Also the playground garden area it's just beautiful. There's an observation room and daily life activities class. There's an area where they can play musical instruments, play games, sleeping area for the younger ones. There's library and music class, dressing room. I just wanted to share all of these with you. So it was, this gave me an opportunity to see where our staff members who have small children and our members of parliament from different parties who have small children are sending their children to. Actually, as someone who's a mother, but mother of an older child, I will say, I think for us also as members of parliament, it is nice to know that there's children close by. So I suggest that when we are under stress and where there's a lot of arguments and lots of tense discussions in the Grand National Assembly, I plan on going and visiting the child care facilities and playing with the children for a little bit, because they're our future, and I think this will give us an opportunity to lose some of the stress. I know I'm over my time. Thank you so much. I'll stop right here.
Thank you, Ms. Kapachikan. If you allow me, we will move forward to session number 4. For those who have raised your hands, we'll take all your interventions after the 4th session. So last but definitely not least, we will proceed to our next topic, which is working in partnership with men to advance gender equality. And I call on Ms. Ivana Popovic, member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia, to take the floor, please. And you have 4 minutes.
Madam President, it seems like that your colleague from Serbia has disconnected. So we have Mr. Jamal Fakhru and Mr. Sven Benjamin.
Okay, so then I invite Mr. Jamal Mohammed Fakhru, first vice chairperson of the Shura Council of the Kingdom of Bahrain, to give us his intervention. Please. You're muted, Mr. Jamal.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Hala, and thanks to the IPU and to the group here tonight. I really enjoyed the almost 2 hours session tonight about women empowerment and about women participation in Parliament. I want to start my 4 minutes talk really is to say that birds cannot fly with one wing. And whatever we want to do, And when we talk about the role of the men in the gender equality with women, it cannot work only by men alone. It is really a great partnership, and we have seen over the year how this great partnership have reflected on the development and the involvement of women in parliament and in the equalization of men and women in the community at large. We have seen major development in the past, I would say 20 to 30 years. And I would say that the parliamentarians have played a major role in doing that. Parliamentarians, men and women, have played a major role in doing that by issuing the right legislation and the right laws and regulations in each country. I think we have seen, and many of the participants today spoke about how the improvement of the number of participant ladies and women in the parliament. And I can talk about this part of the world when we can see we have a lady speaker here in Bahrain, we have a vice chair in Saudi, a vice chair speaker in Qatar. We have a 50% participant of women in the UAE. We have 20% of participants of women in Saudi. We have 25% participants and 27% in Egypt, and so on and so on. The number of participation is increasing, and really, this didn't come just like this. It came by joint work and joint change of community by men and women. I think if we want to talk about the equalization, I think we are there, but I always believe that if we believe in real equalization, we need to achieve the 50% of a presence of men and women in every sector and everywhere. I really don't like to talk about percentage less than 50% for women and men. I think we need to push more to have women participation in the community in every single sector, whether it is in politics and non-politics. I think the women equalization became part of our values. I think every single firm, company, and country have women equalization as part of its values and objective, and it's becoming really a major role for each government to try to achieve by certain time, by certain date. I think also that Parliament have played a major role by educating and changing the mindset in the community, but also I think the media and I believe some politicians have played a major role to achieve that change. We might have a very small group of extreme religious groups in each faith that really are still against women participation, but the number and the effect of these groups is minimizing year after year. So what I want to say that we had a great partnership between men and women. I really look to the day when I will see an equal participation between men and women in every single part of our life, including Parliament. I think I finished my 3.5 minutes, Hala, and I'll give you 30 seconds for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fakhro, and we are really fortunate in Bahrain with the support that we get from our male colleagues in the Parliament, and we are very proud really to work together. Lastly, I'm pleased to invite Mr. Sven Spengeman, member of the House of Commons of Canada, to share his knowledge on the topic, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour, bon après-midi, chers collègues. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Thank you so much for the invitation. I want to thank and give a shout out to the preceding speaker, His Excellency Jamal Mohammed Fakhru, for his allyship and for his remarks. I'm honored to be here. I'm mindful that gender equality remains one of the super priorities globally for a number of different reasons, for moral reasons, for reasons of economic development, empowerment in so many ways, and also for peace building. Our societies will not be able to flourish until we have substantive equality for everybody. And 5 years ago at the 137th IPU Assembly, I had the opportunity to co-moderate a similar panel discussion marking the 5th anniversary of the Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments. And I'm very pleased that as we mark the plan's 10th anniversary, we are once again pausing to take stock of the progress that we've made towards achieving gender equality within our parliaments. Since 2017, we have witnessed several positive developments in the Parliament of Canada. Last year, we had a record 103 women who were elected to the House of Commons, and that's 30.5% of all seats in the Canadian House of Commons. And in the Senate, there are currently 45 women, which represent 49.5% of all senators. In 2018, the Canadian Parliament enacted the Department for Women and Gender Equality Act that established an entirely new department for the advancement of gender equality. And in that same year, the Parliament also enacted the Canadian Gender Budgeting Act, which established a new policy that requires the government to consider gender and diversity in the federal budget and in taxation and in resource allocation decisions. This is important because it really speaks to the systematicity of gender equality work. It needs to happen at every level, through every lens, at every instance. And the House of Commons also adopted a new workplace harassment and violence prevention policy, and this policy provides for the prevention and protection, both prevention and protection measures, and also reporting and investigative requirements. The Canadian Senate modified its ethics and conflict of interest code for senators to create a new framework that addresses harassment and violence cases. And although we're moving in the right direction, there is still significant work that needs to be done going forward. Even in Canada, gender-based inequalities and discrimination persist, including in Parliament. And the answer is that as parliamentarians, all of us have to set positive examples. And as men, we have to be real allies. So overcoming gender-based inequalities and discrimination starts with education and awareness. And in 2016, I had the opportunity to introduce a private member's bill, Bill C-309, which was an act to establish Gender Equality Week in the House of Commons. This bill was successfully enacted into law in June 2018, and it designates the 4th week of September every year as Gender Equality Week across Canada. The first of these was celebrated in 2018. And it gives Canadians an opportunity to really look at all the gaps that still persist in the private sector and government and the male-dominated professions, including defense and security, in schools and universities, in workplaces, at leisure activities. And the bill really, in its preamble, set out the gaps in very clear language. It didn't just say, okay, we're going to celebrate the achievements of women. It really very plainly said, these are all the things that still need to be done. It's important to reflect on the promotion of gender equality and to remain engaged in achieving greater inclusiveness and full gender equality. And this cannot happen without male allyship. Women cannot and should not be left to do this work alone. And that's precisely what the IPU Plan of Action says. It says the realization of a gender-sensitive parliament based on the ultimate goal of gender equality in all its structures, methods, and work will not take place without the support and involvement of male parliamentarians. And this statement also applies to our work outside parliaments. Parliamentarians are engaged not just in our legislative chambers, but in many ways in the community. So let me just close very briefly with a few thoughts on how, as parliamentarians and throughout the work we do, including work in our communities, we can encourage men and boys to become better allies. We can host and participate in gender equality events at the local level. This includes International Women's Day, and we can recognize gender equality champions and initiatives. We can designate gender equality as a publicly declared objective for local programming and initiatives over which we have influence as members of parliament. One Canadian example is the Canada Summer Jobs Program, which is a program that's aimed at creating employment positions for young people. And in my electoral district, I have made gender equality one of the lenses, one of the filters that employers will use to apply for funding under that program. We can ensure that gender equality principles are applied in all parliamentary processes and activities, not just in the House itself, and this includes committee work. One example from just a week and a half ago, I'm a member of the National Committee on Defense. We had a witness panel that included 3 very accomplished and distinguished male witnesses. And at the end of the panel, I raised a point of order to the chair to suggest that all of us collectively turn our minds to making sure that representation isn't just reflected in the Assembly of Parliamentarians, but also with respect to panels of witnesses in front of our committees. And then lastly, we can ensure that women parliamentarians and candidates remain free from bullying, harassment, and abuse during elections and leadership races. And these are often the most toxic periods of our work and the ones that tend to discourage women the most from even entering or considering entering politics. So these are 4 concrete recommendations. Once again, I'm thrilled to be with you. I thank all my male allies and everybody here for the organization of this tremendously important discussion, and I remain at your disposal going forward. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you so much, Mr. Spengeman, for your valuable input and recommendations. And we now open the floor for the discussions. May I call on Madam from Nicaragua? But please, if we can limit it to 1 minute, because we're already past our allocated time. Thank you.
Un minuto, Lele. Un minuto. Sí, gracias, buenos días, ¿verdad? A todos presentes en esta sesión. Un saludo muy especial de nuestro presidente de la Asamblea Nacional, el doctor Gustavo Porra Cortés. El día de hoy para nosotros es un placer estar compartiendo con cada uno de los participantes y escuchar las experiencias. Decir de que en Nicaragua hemos avanzado. Ya lo hemos venido diciendo en las diferentes sesiones y en los espacios, y creo de que es notorio de cómo hemos venido avanzando. Tenemos dentro de nuestro parlamento, somos mayoría, las mujeres en el plenario, en la junta directiva, de 7 miembros de la junta directiva de la Asamblea Nacional, 4 son mujeres de la junta directiva. De igual forma, en nuestras comisiones de trabajo, son 15 comisiones, y también las mujeres pues somos mayoría dentro de las presidencias de las comisiones. Decirle de que no solamente en Nicaragua pues las mujeres ocupamos el espacio por ocupar, sino que son un espacio donde ocupamos un lugar de poder de decisión. O sea, son espacios donde nosotras las mujeres trabajamos a la par, ¿verdad? De hombres y mujeres en la complementariedad, y venimos desarrollando el trabajo dentro de la institución de la Asamblea Nacional, también en las diferentes direcciones de la Asamblea Nacional, donde las mujeres también tienen un poder de decisión, tanto en las asesorías de las comisiones y en las diferentes direcciones del Parlamento Nacional. Decirle también de que tenemos la mujer joven también, ¿verdad? No solamente mujer como mujer, sino también la participación y la inclusión de la juventud en el tema generacional, así como el tema de género. Y esto pasa, ¿verdad?, por una voluntad política que gracias a la reforma a la ley electoral que tuvimos en mayo de 2021, exige y mandata a todos los partidos políticos de presentar en su lista tanto un hombre como una mujer. Entonces aquí venimos nosotros y decimos de que los hombres y las mujeres tenemos igualdad de derechos, de oportunidades, pero así también de desarrollarnos y poder aportar al desarrollo de nuestro país. Porque las mujeres estudiadas, las mujeres que tenemos la capacidad de aportar, creo que estamos ocupando cada uno de nuestros espacios donde podemos aportar al desarrollo de nuestro país. Decirles de que Nicaragua vamos avanzando. Estamos
Excuse me, if we can conclude, please.
Bueno, agradecerle, ¿verdad?, por este espacio. En Nicaragua, pues vamos a seguir avanzando, le decía, y decirles de que estamos trabajando en función de el trabajo complementario entre hombres y mujeres desde nuestro Parlamento. Gracias.
Thank you. Next, I call on Madame from Equatorial Guinea. Madame.
Atentamente a todos los participantes.
En nombre del Parlamento de la República de Guinea Ecuatorial, permítanos hacerles saber que es necesario que se reconozca la capacidad y competencia de la mujer en el ámbito nacional. Somos conscientes de que la mujer es la piedra angular y para ello el gobierno de la República de Guinea Ecuatorial tiene la voluntad clara de hacer, ratificar y firmar todos los convenios internacionales. Para ello, en lo que concierne a la política contra el acoso, cabe señalar que el Parlamento de la República de Guinea Ecuatorial no estima necesaria una regulación especial para dicha reproche conducta, ya que viene sancionado en el Código Penal. A pesar de que la representación de las mujeres es mínima, ya que de 72 mujeres solamente hay 12 mujeres, pero estamos siendo respetadas. Ejercemos nuestro ejercicio plenamente. El Parlamento de la República de Guinea Ecuatorial tiene la representativa del género. Lo tenemos presente para aclarar una igualdad de género considerable. Es necesario que se reconozca el esfuerzo que la mujer aporta en el desarrollo sostenible. Es claro también informar que hemos creído en el Parlamento de la República de Guinea Ecuatorial que los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible de la ONU del 2020 al 23, del 2020 a 30 y de la ONU de la Unión Africana del 20 al 63, reconocer el esfuerzo de la mujer. Nosotros somos conscientes que para trabajar y conseguir los objetivos programados es necesario emplear estrategias para conseguir los objetivos programados en ese momento.
Excuse me, you can conclude, please.
Gracias. Cabe destacar que el Congreso de la República de Guinea Ecuatorial, en el partido en poder, que se celebró el 24 de noviembre, se ha declarado una cuota de 35% de las candidaturas para puestos electivos a favor de la mujer. Es todo y muchas gracias por la oportunidad.
Thank you, Madam. And
Madam President, I think we need to conclude because the interpreters need to end the meeting if it's okay with everyone.
Okay. So to conclude our today's sessions, I once again thank you all co-sponsors, speakers, panelists, and participants for your interesting and inspiring talks. And marking the 10th anniversary of the Plan of Action for Gender-Sensitive Parliaments, today we've listened to several success stories and progress made towards achieving our gender-sensitive parliaments, the goal that we're looking for. But we still have a long way to go. And hopefully with the experiences shared today and the best practices we've heard, we can go back to our parliament's plan and implement the actions needed to make our parliaments more gender sensitive. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Yes.